Hey y'all, this episode involves discussions about murder, and it does mention murder and violence against children. This episode also involves foul language that some listeners may find offensive and may not be suitable for our younger audience. Listener discretion is advised. Hey y'all! I'm Mary.
I'm Christina.
And you already know what this is, you turned it on.
True crime down yonder. Welcome back.
Welcome back, everyone. By the time we release this, it'll be Friday. Hey, Friday. Yeah. So, guys, we're going to jump in today's case. It is not going to be a whole full-on hour case. Just want to throw that out there. But I don't necessarily think it would be considered a mini.
Okay.
But anyways, before we get into that, I think our haters have arrived.
They're here.
Our haters have arrived.
No, we've always had haters, but now we have a troll.
Yes.
And we're not even going to mention him because we don't want to give him the attention, but it's so funny. I just find it so amusing. So apparently we offended the BFF of a serial killer.
Yeah, and apparently we don't know the true story. Guys, we just want to throw out there that anytime we do an episode and we're giving you guys information, we always put the source where we get the information from.
Yeah.
We don't just pull it out of our ass. It literally either comes from a documentary, internet web articles or books.
Articles, something like that.
Court records. That's how we get our information.
Yeah.
And to come at us and tell us that we're not telling the whole truth or the whole story, hey. And then also, if you want to get mad about us stating our own opinion on our podcast, then that's okay too. You don't have to listen.
Yeah. Media accounts vary. They differ, and sometimes they don't always get it right. And, sometimes we might not always get it right.
Absolutely.
When we listen back to our episodes, we're like, oh, man, I didn't mention that, or I said that the wrong way.
Or
whatever.
I forgot this. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we don't, mind, case corrections. But when you come out and defend a murderer, a mass murderer and a serial killer and a rapist, and you're saying that we don't understand, we don't know the whole story, but you're not offering the whole story, for one, and two, our source actually contained interviews from this person.
And that was on mainstream TV, ID channel.
Don't come, and who knows who this guy is. He's probably not even, it doesn't even know this. The serial killer we're talking about. He's just trying to troll, but yeah. So, and we always try to be considerate and be respectful and compassionate of other people, but it just really doesn't apply to known admitted serial killers and mass murderers and rapists. I'm sorry, it doesn't. And this is our podcast, and we're going to say what the fuck we want.
We don't try to really spread our opinions about, our listeners or anything like that. We love you guys.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, we're going to talk shit about a serial killer.
Yeah, that's what we do.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
So, if that offends you, then turn this off. Because guess what? I don't give a fuck. I'm going to say that a motherfucker's a douchebag.
So, and if you go to our YouTube, you can see what we're talking about. But I think, we've given the guy enough attention now. Trolls are not just those little pencil toppers that 90s kids had.
Man.
They're real.
They're real. They exist on the
They
internet.
crawl out from under their bridges and they make themselves known.
Anyways, moving on. We just wanted to put that out. I am covering today's case, and the case that I'm bringing y'all today is a 77-year-old case. Now, this is a case that's also, unfortunately, another story of our flawed justice system and the failure to protect a young Black American boy of his rights as an American.
That's pretty much the history of true crime in the South. Let's just be honest.
Yes.
A lot of, especially when we go back in time on these cases, even in the Annette Lyles case, there was some racial injustice there.
This case actually made history, and it ended up making a comeback 70 years later, but we're going to get to that. This is about the murders of two little white girls from a very small town of Alcolu, South Carolina. But this is also about the unfair accusation and trials of a 14-year-old boy named George Stinney Jr. All right, now that I've presented to you a little bit about the case, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the place. So, of course, this took place in Alcolu, South Carolina, which was established between the years of about 1885 and 1890 by D.W. Alderman as a company mill town. It was created to house the employees of his timber company and lumber mill, which were located in an isolated area. The name Alcolu is derived from Al for Alderman, Co for Caldwell, one of Alderman's friends, and Lou for Lula, who was then the only daughter of Alderman and his wife. When it was built, Alcolu was a company town where everybody worked in one of the various businesses of D&W Alderman and Sons. The business grew to encompass logging operations, a sawmill, a planing mill, a hosiery mill, a flooring mill, an oat mill, all the mills, and a farming and cattle ranch. They also ran a cotton gin and several other businesses. This was definitely a town with many job opportunities. The company eventually founded schools and churches and built baseball fields. They also got an electric plant and a telephone system for the town. D.W. Alderman also founded Alcolu and the Parada Railroads. The Alcolu post office was established on August 17, 1888. His friend Alderman Caldwell, whom inspired the town's name, was appointed its first postmaster. In 1947, the Alderman family sold the lumber mill to the Southern Coatings and Chemical Companies and the Williams Furniture Company. 2 decades later, in 1968, it was bought by Georgia Pacific Company and continued its operations until 2000, when the mill was finally closed down. Now, after they closed the mill, a census from 2010 resulted that Alcolu only had a population of 429 people, which is a very, very small population.
Yeah. Did it go down after they closed the mill?
Yes, it did, because it was a company town, and
Right.
most of the people that lived there
Worked at the mill?
Yes.
Okay.
In 1944, the town of Alcolu had a fairly even mixed population of black and whites. However, the town was still highly segregated because it was 1944. The whites lived on one side of the railroad tracks and the blacks lived on the other.
Okay, so there was actually like a line.
Yeah, like literally
Okay.
one side and then
Like you just don't cross
other.
it.
And,
Okay.
and that's what they did. They just didn't cross the
Just
tracks.
didn't cross it. Okay.
So George Stinney Jr., which is the man that we're talking about today, he was a 14-year-old boy that lived with his family on the black folk side of the train tracks. He was the son of George Stinney Sr. and Amy Stinney. Stinney Jr. was also one of 5 children. He was born on October 21st, 1929, which October 21st is our brother's birthday.
Yeah.
His brother John, who was 17 in 1944, was the oldest. Then it was 14-year-old Stinney Jr., followed by 12-year-old Charles and his 2 little sisters, Catherine, whom was 10 at the time, and Amy, who was 7. Stinney Jr.'s father, George Stinney Sr., was a mill worker for the local mill, and the family did live in the company housing that was provided by Stinney's employer. Stinney Jr. was described as a quiet kid that didn't usually cause trouble and obeyed his parents. On March 23, 1944, 11-year-old Betty Binnicker and 7-year-old Mary Thames went for a bike ride that they would never return from. Betty and Mary were both white, so they lived on the opposite side of the tracks where the white people lived.
Okay.
Mary Emma Thames was born on March 14th, 1937, to parents Ben Thames and Lula Mae Barn Thames. I wonder if she had any relation to the Aldermans, because her name was Lula.
I don't know. It's a small town.
Yeah.
It's possible.
I don't know.
But
I thought
Lula
about
was
that.
kind of a common name back then.
Yeah, true. I kind of thought about that while I was doing my research. Mary had actually just celebrated her 7th birthday with her parents and her older brother, Ben Jr. Betty June Binnicker was born December 9th, 1932, to parents Daisy Lee Dukes Binnicker and John Sanders Binnicker. She lived with her parents and her sister Lorraine, who I'm not sure was younger or older. They didn't have any information on Lorraine. I was actually not able to find a ton of information on the victims at all, which that kind of sucked, but I was able to find some things, and most of it I had to get it from like their obituary. Betty and Mary decided they were going to cruise the neighborhood on their bikes in search for some wildflowers. Well, the girls ended up on the other side of the tracks where the blacks lived. Along their travels, they came in contact with George Stinney Jr. and his youngest sister, Amy, who were said to be in their front yard walking the family cow, Lizzie. Moo.
So they just walked the family cow?
Yeah.
Okay.
Lizzie. And her name was Lizzie.
That's cute.
Yeah, it is cute. The girls just simply asked if they knew where anywhere around the neighborhood that they could pick maypops, which I'm not really sure what that is. But
I don't know. I'll have to look that up, what a maypop is. I'll have to look it up. I've been seeing like this interesting wildflower on the side of the road. I've been wanting to know what it is. Maybe it's a maypop. I'll check it.
Yeah. Stinney Jr. and Amy didn't know of any around. They really didn't even know what they were talking about, so they told the girls that they didn't know where any were. Okay. And that was that. So Betty and Mary continued on their journey. Well, that night, Betty and Mary never returned home, and both of their parents were in terror, which I can understand.
Yeah.
They immediately let the whole community know that they were missing, so they organized a search team to go and look for the girls, which George Stinney Sr., Stinney's father, even helped assist in the search for the girls. Well, the following morning, the beaten and lifeless bodies of 11-year-old Betty June Binnicker and 8-year-old Mary Emma Thames were found in a muddy drainage ditch with their 2 bicycles thrown on top of their little bodies.
Oh, shit.
They had been beaten to death with severe blunt force trauma to their head. Police began investigating the area right after they found the girls' bodies and around in the area, which wasn't too far from the Stinney house. A witness identified George Stinney Jr. as the last person they saw the 2 girls corresponding with. The police then went and they found George Stinney Jr. and his brother, John, and they arrested both of them.
Okay, so let's back up for a second. So when they make contact with George Stinney and they ask him about these flowers, I mean, they were kind of in, I wouldn't say public, but they're around other people, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and this is the last time he saw them.
Right.
Or the last time, and so...
He was the last person they knew had contact with them.
Okay, but they have witnesses to this conversation. They have witnesses, yeah, he spoke to them. If they went off somewhere and didn't come in contact with anybody else that anyone saw, I mean, how is that implicating him? It doesn't make sense. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me. I mean, obviously this is senseless, but I just don't even see why they went down this path. Did he... Okay, continue. I have questions.
You have to understand, this is 1944, and I hate to say it, but that's what a lot of people did. They were going to blame the black guy.
So I guess what I need to know is, like, okay, after they talk to him and they go off looking for their flowers or whatever, does he leave? Does he go after them? Does he?
No, and we're going to get to that.
Okay.
So the police end up arresting George Stinney Jr. and John Stinney, which is his older brother, and they take them into questioning. They interrogate both of them. The 2 officers, whom I could not find a name for, interrogated Stinney Jr. Stinney Jr.'s family recalls that the 14-year-old indeed had an alibi. They could account his presence at home that whole day. His sister, Amy, recalls him being at home and not leaving for the remainder of the day. Even through Stinney Jr.'s family, they even vouched for his alibi. The police were certain that they had their guy. They weren't really trying to hear about any kind of alibis or anything like that. And Stinney's brother was just kind of like, yeah, I really don't know anything. And of course, they let him go. But after hours of interrogation, George Stinney Jr. confessed. And later, that's going to come back as a coerced confession.
Okay. Yeah,
so,
I can believe that.
He knew no matter what he said, they were going to think that he was guilty either way.
Right.
He was officially charged in the murders. On April 24th, 1944, exactly 1 month after the murders, Stinney stood trial. The trial was super brief, lasting less than 3 hours. And the jury coming back with a guilty verdict in about 10 minutes and sentenced the 14-year-old to death by electrocution.
Shit.
Yeah. So on June 16th, 1944, only 83 days after the murders, George Stinney Jr. was put to death in the state's Central Correctional Institute in Columbia, South Carolina. Witnesses say that Stinney's little body was strapped into a chair that was made for a grown man. The head plate and the straps were too big for him, so they had to adjust everything to his size.
Oh.
The Stinney family's tragic did not end there, though, unfortunately. George Stinney Sr. was fired from his job at the mill. The family was bullied into moving out of Alcolu, and they ended up moving to Pinewood, South Carolina after this, according to Amy.
Okay.
Which, that's terrible that his family had to endure that.
Yeah. I mean, and I have a great deal of empathy for even people who are guilty, like their families.
Right.
Because people give them hell. And I mean, it's not always their fault. I mean, yes, sometimes you can see how their family kind of made them like that. But in a lot of cases, they didn't know anything about it. They didn't do anything to cause it, but they hold it against them. It's,
right.
You got to sympathize with those people too, to an extent,
Yeah. I mean, honestly, this whole time I was researching this, I just felt bad for this little boy because if you see a picture of him,
he just looks innocent. And
he's
he's
a boy.
Yeah.
He's a little boy and he's in a prison outfit. And he looks like he doesn't look like a grown man. He looks like a child.
Yeah.
And it's just sad. And I hate that, a lot of our Black Americans were suppressed in that time and they were looked at the wrong way when it came to the justice system. But, okay, so we're going to fast forward 6 decades to 2004. And
so pretty much they think they found the guilty person, they execute him, and the case is closed, right?
The case is closed until to 2004.
Okay.
An historian and Alcolu native, George Frierson, began digging deeper into this 1944 case. On an interview he did with True Crime Chronicles, have you ever heard of them?
No, are they a podcast?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. I'll have to check it.
They are really good. I think I'll put them in the show notes. I'll tell you what episode I did use for this information. But Frierson explained that even though Frierson himself was born 8.5 years after the execution of Stinney, the story of George Stinney Jr. was still talked about in the community even decades after. Frierson also recalls that the Black elders in the community would tell him to watch how he spoke to the white people because they didn't want him to end up like that little black boy. And that's quoted as that's what they actually referred to him as, the little black boy.
Yeah.
Not only was Frierson set on learning about this case, the Stinney family argued that the teen never had a fair shot. After years of research and appeals filed, in January 2014, a new trial was finally to be heard. So apparently, after 10 years, they were able to make some kind of progress in the court system because they had this old case taken back to court. So in this trial, the Stinney family's attorney brought to light all the mistakes and errors made in the courtroom 70 decades before. For one, George Stinney Jr. was questioned and arrested without the access to his parents or a right to proper counsel.
Yeah, that's totally against the Constitution.
Well, see, in 1944,
Did they have Miranda rights then?
That didn't come out until 1966. So the 1966 Supreme Court ruling on Miranda versus Arizona, which is the law that requires law enforcement officials to advise a suspect or suspects of their rights, had not been ruled at the time in 1944, but now is in court process. So they were able to use that. And for two, George Stinney Jr. was appointed a 31-year-old attorney by the name of Charles Plowden. Plowden was also a lawyer and an aspiring politician. At the time, I'm not really for sure what election he was in, but he was in some kind of political election.
Okay, so he was running for...
Yes.
Yeah.
He was running
some sort
for
of office?
Yes.
Okay.
This was a major trial that was happening in this area. Alcolu natives piled in this courtroom to watch this trial. The jury, composed of 12 white men, which would decide his fate pretty much, which they were not a good judge and reflection of his peers. You know what I mean?
Right.
And Plowden never requested a change of venue, which would have given Stinney a better chance at having an impartial jury.
Because so they held it in this small town?
They held it in the small town that it happened.
Okay.
For 3, during the 1944 trial, the prosecution's sole case relied on testimony of 2 police officers that gave an account of Stinney's confessing to the murders. And according to Stinney's confession, after the 2 girls stopped to ask about the flowers, Stinney then followed them and unsuccessfully attempted to sexually assault Betty, and then started to beat both Betty and Mary with a nearby railroad spike.
Okay, so this is the 1940s. Mm-hmm. So I guess back then they didn't have any recordings of confessions, right? So this is pretty much just these officers' word against his. So there's no evidence that he even confessed at all.
Correct.
Okay. All right, and I remember like the Miranda rights case because a case I'm working on now, and I think you know what case I'm talking about, happened in the 60s. And I remember reading in my research that this took place in like 1967, and the year before, the Supreme Court had ruled on, Miranda rights. So I'm glad you said something about that, because I forgot when that was put in place.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. But, yeah, it sounds like this poor kid, got screwed, really.
Yeah, he did. Plowden also failed to cross-examine any of the witnesses and never called forth any witnesses that were able to corroborate Stinney's alibi. He also never presented the fact that this was a 95-pound, 5'1", 14-year-old child, and that it would have been really hard for him to be able to murder 2 girls at one time.
Yeah. So
I'm saying that it's not impossible. I get that. But...
So I'm thinking this Plowden guy, his attorney, really didn't fight for him because he was afraid of what it would do to his political career or keep him from being elected.
So he pretty much sit on his hands the whole time. There really wasn't much of a fight when it came to this trial. That's why his trial was so brief. And the jury only took 10 minutes to deliberate on this. I've never heard of anybody taking that short of time.
Take the time to really discuss it. They just pretty much gives you enough time to write down guilty and give it to the judge.
So, of course, with this new trial going on, Betty's family, which it was her niece, that came forward and said that she feels like that this needs to be left alone, that they got the right person and to just let it be. Well, on December 10th, 2014, Judge Carmen T. Mullins of the 14th Circuit Court in South Carolina vacated George Stinney's sentence.
Good.
Circuit Judge Mullins makes an important distinction, stating that her task is not to determine whether Stinney is innocent or guilty, but rather to decide if Stinney received a fair trial, which in this case he
obviously didn't. Yeah.
And so a 14-year-old boy was put to death off of just hearsay. And I believe he is the youngest to have been executed in America to this day.
Yeah, executing a 14-year-old boy, sending him to the electric chair. And back then, when you got a sentence like that, they carried it out like right away.
Absolutely.
I mean, like within a month, unless you appealed or whatever, they carried that shit out pretty quick. I remember like when we did Anjette Lyles, it was like, I think she got convicted in like November and they were going to execute her in December, which of course there was an appeal. So they couldn't.
Right.
But yeah, they're like, it's like making a dentist appointment. It's like, yep, 2 weeks. But yeah,
they give this kid no time. They literally executed him less than 2 months after he was sentenced. So, I mean, it just makes me cringe. I came across this case months ago and I just couldn't help. I mean, it was just something I really wanted to cover.
On a lot of levels, because it seems like most likely there were 3 victims in this case. And nobody got any justice. Because,
not even the little girls, because it's terrible that those little girls died the way they did. And I'm not taking that away from them at all.
Yeah.
However, I did read something, and I'm not for sure where it came from, so I'm not going to, just take it as it is, that apparently there had been somebody that had already passed away that made a deathbed confession saying that they had killed these little girls, and it was a white man.
Okay.
So they didn't give any names on it. It was just something that I had read in an article. I don't know how true that was, but it is amazing. It's amazing how far our justice system has come, but it's crazy it's just crazy what Black people had to endure in America.
Yeah, this almost reminds me of the Green Mile. Like,
that's exactly what they used. Like, this is like...
Was this the inspiration?
This was an idea, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Even though, he wasn't 14, he wasn't like this little boy, but yeah, it's like the same situation.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just like the West Memphis 3, where they spend so much time like focusing on these 3 kind of oddball kids that they don't ever get the real person. So there's like a killer walking around out there. And just like in this case, I'm like 99% sure that George Stinney did not do this, that somebody else did. And they got to just like live out their lives, and God only knows who else they hurt. Because I mean, if you can just murder 2 little girls like that, something's wrong with you. And I'm sure they've done something to somewhere else, something to someone else in their lifetime.
Exactly.
No doubt. And they were just free to walk the streets. And so, like I said, they start, you have 2 victims, but now you have 3. And children at that. They're all children.
Yeah. It's definitely to me, it's a heavy case. I mean, it's old, and I don't know what it is, but here lately, I've been really picking up the older cases. I guess because these older cases align us to what we have now.
Yeah.
And when it comes to a court of law, and I mean, it's just amazing how far that we have come in this country. I feel like, I'm not going to get into a big political rant about it, but Blacks are still suppressed here, even a little bit.
Yeah.
And, we still need to work on things, but I hate that this kid had to die at such a young age.
It is sad.
And I hate that those 2 little girls passed away too, but I hate that these police officers did not try to investigate more. They just focused in on one person. And while they were focusing in on that one person, the real person fled.
Right. And I mean, we see that time and time again. And it's not always racially motivated.
No.
It's just always like, what sucker can we pin this on?
What's
or who
the
do we
weird
not
kid
like?
Or
who do we
whatever.
not like?
Yeah.
But I mean, oftentimes, and of course, with us, I think we've come to realize that more than we ever had before. Now that we're doing this podcast and we're covering the southeastern United States. And when we look at these historical cases, we see this racism a lot.
Absolutely.
And, it's like, I don't want to continuously bring it up, but when you're talking about an old case, it's pretty much there.
Yeah.
And so I've been thinking about it, and like, we're going to do, we've been stuck back in time. We've been doing like older cases for a little while now. And I think we've got like 2 more coming up, and then we're going to shoot into the 2000s. We're going to have to find something that happened more recently.
I mean, but honestly, this is why I'm glad this is why I'm glad our podcast is covering the Southeast, because we are able to get the historical part about this, and we are able to talk about, the hard things that did happen back then and how much things have changed, because I mean, the South, I mean, we're fucked up, man, but we try to come together now. So, I mean, we're really trying to it's time to push out that old racism bullshit, okay? People as a whole, people can be shitty no matter what race they are.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but that is my mini case for today.
Yeah, and I feel bad for George Stinney, but also his family. Like, especially like his mom. I mean, just as a mother, just seeing your baby have to go through something like that is just horrific. And of course, I feel bad for the little girl's parents too. I mean, the whole case is just awful, and not enough was done. But like I said, we see that a lot.
I feel bad for a lot of mothers, like with black sons that they have to worry about this with.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, it's just, that's another discussion for another time. But yeah, I guess.
Anyway, so one thing we want to throw out is we are working on a historical mystery. We're going to do a case. Sorry, that's my phone. But we're going to do a case, and I think we're going to release it week after next. And it's a historical mystery and also a true crime case.
Yay.
So we're really excited about it. And so we're going to start a little giveaway. Woo. I think we're going to post it on Facebook tomorrow. And we're going to be giving away one of our True Crime Down Yonder coffee mugs.
Yay!
And it's just, are we going to do Instagram and Facebook or just Facebook?
I don't know. I just got so excited I hit the mic.
I think we're going to do just Facebook on this one.
I feel like we have more people on Instagram than we do Facebook, though.
Okay. Well, I mean, it might be hard to keep track of it. But anyway, what we're going to do, I guess we can release it to Instagram too. Open it up to them. So we're going to drop some clues. And the first person that can accurately guess which historical mystery that we're going to do, or the true crime case, if you can do that, which you probably are not going to be able to do that. But whoever can correctly tell us what this historical mystery is about based on the clues we give, will win the coffee mug. Yeah. And, you can IM us your stuff and we will send it out to you.
So if you think that you are a big true crime fanatic, this is your time to shine.
I don't know. This is more history. I mean, there's, obviously true crime, but there is history. Well, if you think about it,
there is true crime and history. They go hand in hand.
Yeah, crimes have been
committed
for a long ass time.
She opened up another channel, and I think it's called Black History. It's where she
I've heard about that.
Yeah, okay. It's where she talks about history, but true crime does tie into that. So this does tie into that, but if you're anything like us that just love all of these types of historical cases, then you shouldn't have a problem with figuring it out.
Right. So. Okay, yeah, my daughter's blowing me up over here, guys. So, anywho, check us out on Instagram at
TC_Down Yonder.
Check us on Facebook at
www.facebook.com/TC Down Yonder.
Twitter
at Down Crime.
Or shoot us an email at tcdownyonder@gmail.com. Give us your case suggestions, any corrections, if you want to defend your serial killer best friend, or whatever. We're open to it.
We're open for whatever, man. That's what we're here for.
That's what we're here for.
We're here for it all.
Anyway,
we love you guys.
We do. All right.
And before we let you guys go tonight, we have a podcast that we want to share with you guys. And I'm going to let Christina kind of tell the story on this.
So, interesting backstory here. A few weeks ago, or maybe it's been over a month ago, I'm always looking for a good podcast. And I was searching on Apple, and I ran into one called Human Monsters. And I was like, oh shit, this has got to be good. So I click on it and I go through the list of episodes, and I find one called Interview with a Necrophile.
Ooh.
And I'm like, oh shit, I have to listen to this. So I listened to it, and it is the darkest, most brutally honest thing you will ever hear in your life. I mean, it really kind of grosses you out, but it's really interesting. And so I sent it to Mary, and I was like, you've got to hear this shit.
And I was
she listens to it, and she's like, what the fuck? I mean, it blew our minds. So I think we gave them a shout out on our social media.
Yeah, Morgan, is the host.
Yeah, we were talking about that. And of course, he commented back, and we've been kind of swapping messages and interacting with him. But this is a great podcast. If you're kind of a little dark and twisted like we are, obviously, if you're here, we think that you're going to enjoy this podcast.
Absolutely.
So,
and you guys will also be hearing me on Human Monsters soon, because
Morgan
they're doing
and I are doing with Mary.
Yeah, because I used to be a correctional officer, and this is the only time I've ever been cool. So,
yeah.
But anyways, guys, before we let you go tonight, we just wanted you to hear this podcast. So here is...
It's just a clip. It's not the whole podcast.
It's not the whole podcast.
It's just a clip.
So here's just a small clip. But other than that, enjoy Human Monsters. Bye, y'all.
He forced his way through the thick foliage. He suddenly stopped. "Oh Christ," he said. Among a stretch of willow trees lay the body of a young woman. To aggravate him further, she fell asleep while he killed the rest of them. He'd burned through 7 women. He'd made short work of them, no matter how hard they'd fought. I will always remember that face at that door. Very evil face. Finally, I kicked the door in. The image will be with me forever. We could see in the kitchen there was a body on the floor. A lot of blood. He finished in time to be home before his wife returned from work. In her eyes, he was the same. Good old Dennis Rader. Inwardly, he was a changed man. He crossed a threshold and emerged on the other side a monster. He was testing his gun and his ability to kill in cold blood. Now his desire to kill human beings took a nefarious turn. His killer instincts were now infused with a sinister urge to visit pain and suffering upon his victims and their loved ones in the most diabolical ways imaginable. These people specialize in the unthinkable. The Human Monsters Podcast. Please join us.